My name is Aiko Kojima Hibino. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Liberal Arts at SAIC School of the Arts Institute of Chicago. It is my utmost joy to present today this documentary, I Am a Comedian. So I teach sociology courses, including one titled Globalizing Japanese Pop Culture, which I offer annually at both at SAIC and at DePaul University. In this course, we use products and phenomena of Japanese pop culture as entry points to critically examine, this keeps falling, critically examine the issues in contemporary Japan and beyond. For example, by discussing Hello Kitty, we explore the concept of cuteness or kawaii through gendered lens. In another case, by tracing the history of superhero and monster shows such as Godzilla, we examine the geopolitics and nuclear discourse within the context of post-colonialism and post-imperialism, extending our discussion to questions of justice. As such, one of the topics I address in the class is freedom of speech, along with the concepts of politicality and apoliticality. The peculiar nature of Japanese society in this regard stands in stark contrast to that of the United States, particularly when it comes to comedy. And that was how I came across the comedian Daisuke Muramoto and this film, I Am a Comedian, which features him. Unlike in the United States, where political satire and social commentary are mainstream forms of comedy, as we see every night on late night shows on major network TV, Japanese mainstream comedy centers on innocuous everyday observation, silly jokes, and slapstick. One theory to explain this difference points to their differing origin. While Western comedy traces its roots to the court jesters, Japanese comedy is said to have originated in ritualistic blessing performances. As such, comedic performances in Japan are generally expected to be cheerful and lighthearted in nature. This may be true to some extent. However, it does not explain the whole picture. We often hear generalization that Asians are culturally reserved and obedient, and therefore do not criticize authority. However, explanations that invoke culture as a black box often obscure the structural conditions and historical processes that have shaped the current situation. In the history of Japanese pop culture, political satire has existed in various forms, including poetry, songs, cartoons, and performing arts. So such expressions often flourish during the periods of social change and democratic expansion. I would like to emphasize that the current Japanese comedy scene, where almost no political satire is found in mainstream media, is largely a phenomenon of the past 2 decades, especially the last 10 years. This shift is in part the result of specific policies implemented by the conservative administration. This is evident when we look at the World Press Freedom Index published by Reporters Without Borders. Among 180 countries, Japan ranked between 35th and 45th in the early 2000s. The ranking significantly improved between 2009 and 2012, rising to 11th place. During the brief period when the Democratic Party of Japan, a center-left party, was in power. However, after the LDP party, the center-right party, regained power, the ranking quickly dropped to around 50th by 2013, when Shinzo Abe, who is one of the most nationalist right-winger among LDP politicians, assumed office. The ranking fell further, reaching its lowest point in history, 72nd, in 2016. Since then, Japan's position has remained at that low level. And it was during that time that protagonist of this documentary, Daisuke Muramoto, rose to stardom as an aspiring and talented young comedian. In 2013, his comedy duo, Woman Rush Hour, won the Manzai, the most prestigious comedy contest, in Japan, becoming the champion among 2,000 professional comedians. His early routines used to be based on daily life and personal observations, just like all other comedians in Japan. However, through the encounter with a community that was damaged by a disaster, his creative interest has shifted toward more social commentary. Yet this shift was not welcome, nor even allowed in mainstream media, as it is too quote-unquote political and inappropriate. So this documentary, I Am a Comedian, follows his professional and personal struggles and his journey to find his true artistic expression through comedy. By the way, the United States has generally ranked between 40th and 50th in the World Press Freedom Index, except during the first 2 years of the Obama administration, when it rose to the 20th. Given the current political climate, that ranking is likely to drop significantly in near future. Yet, at the same time, we still have a strong culture of satirical comedy and creative expression that confronts power and empowers people. So I hope this documentary will spark the kind of conversation we need now more than ever. A panel discussion will follow immediately after the screening, so please stay with us until the end. Now enjoy the show. We are going to have a panel discussion with our panels from each institutions, and Daisuke Muramoto and director Fumiari Hyuga, who is supposed to be here today, but unfortunately he cannot make it. Fumiari Hyuga is a filmmaker who has directed a range of television programs, including Should Young People Shoot Guns?, Syrians Next Door, and The Fact of African American Protest Demonstration. His previous feature-length film, Tokyo Curse, was selected for several international film festivals, including the Juwon International Film Festival 2022 and the Taiwan International Documentary Festival 2022. Its shorter version received the Excellence Award at the Tokyo Doc Short Documentary Showcase and was honored with the prestigious Galaxy Award for Excellence in Television Journalism. This work, I Am a Comedian, was selected for the DMZ Documentary Festival's Industry RAFCA's presentation and Cannes Docs in Progress program. The film had its world premiere at the DMZ Documentary Film Festival and was also screened at the Tokyo International Film Festival. So we were expecting to have him today to join us, but unfortunately he cannot make it. So instead, we had a recorded message from him in which he also explained why he cannot make it today.
皆様こんばんは。映画監督の日向文也です。今日は映画を見てくださりありがとうございました。今日は残念ながら私はそちらに行けません。なぜかというと、私のドキュメンタリーの仕事で、過去にイラクの渡航があったからです。現在ビザの申請を出しても、大使館との面談が4ヶ月後ということもあったり、少し、そちらに伺うのが難しい状況の中で、今回こういうズームという形で皆様とお話しすることになりました。今日はよろしくお願いします。僕の一作目は東京クルドという映画で、日本に暮らす18歳と19歳の、ビザをもらえない、難民認定してもらえないクルド人の、若者2人を、取材した、映画です。で、その映画を通じてさっき話したようにイラクのクルディスタンも、渡航して、アイシスと戦う、兵士を取材したんですけれども、僕が取材したイラクの、クルドの兵士は、お父さんはアルカイダ系のテロリストに殺され、お兄さんをアイシスの、テロリストに殺され、 自身もアイシスと戦い続けるといったような、20代の若者だったんですけれども、そういう、日本に暮らすクルド人でもイラクに暮らすクルドの兵士たちを取材していても、子供じみているかもしれないけれど、やっぱりドキュメンタリーという媒体で自分が活動している中で、やっぱり少し無力感を感じることもあるんですよね。でそういうのはやっぱりドキュメンタリーを撮ったところですぐに社会が良くなるわけではないし、傷ついた人の傷が癒えるわけでもないし、そういう無力感を抱えながら活動する中で、たまたまアメリカのスタンダップコメディアンでイラン系のコメディアン、マズ・ジョブラニっていうコメディアンなんですけれども、彼の映像を見たんですね。で彼はセプテンバー11の後、911の後にアメリカ、世界中に起こったイスラムヘイト、イスラム嫌悪に対してコメディで笑いで、社会の空気を和らげようとしていた。自分と誰かの宗教の違いをやっぱ憎しみっていうことに変えるのではなくて笑いに変えているっていうことにすごくやっぱり感動して、彼のコメディを見た時に自分の無力さに少し響くものがあって、コメディを撮りたいっていうふうに思い出した時に村本大輔さんというコメディアンに出会ったということです。すごくアメリカの表現の自由が確立されていく中で、やっぱレニー・ブルースだったりコメディアンの力ってそこに含まれているっていうふうには思っていて、やっぱコメディってすごいなっていうふうに思っていて、で村本さんをなぜ惹かれたかっていうと、まずその圧倒的な熱量、コメディをしている時の熱量、コメディに対する熱量っていうのはすごくやっぱ感動しますよね。なんか日本で、映画でも紹介されてますけど、日本だと村本さん例えば、嫌われ芸人とか炎上芸人とかっていうふうに言われることはすごく多くて、でそれってすごく曖昧なラベリングというか、ただ政治的なことをネタにしただけでそういうふうなラベリングがされるっていうことって日本ではすごく多くて、それとコメディに関わらず、村本さんに関わらず、例えば女性だからこうしろとか、男性だからああしろとか、アジア系だからこうしろとか、アジア系だからこうだとか、そういう大きなラベリングに縛られて自分の人生の可能性というのをすごく狭めていたりとか、そういう言葉に縛られてしまう人ってすごく多いと思っていて、ただ僕が見てる村本さんっていうのはすごくそういう言葉を、そういうラベリングをなんか軽々超えていくような、その軽やかさと熱を持っているっていうことがすごく僕の中では魅力的で、やっぱり周りに何か言われようが自分の価値、自分の可能性は自分で決めるんだと。誰か他の見知らぬ他者に自分の価値や可能性は絶対に決めさせないっていう、そのやっぱ強さがすごく僕には魅力的で、あと純粋にアメリカに挑戦する、スタンドアップに挑戦する村本さんの姿ってやっぱり自分の未来にすごく自分自身でワクワクできてる、ワクワクしてるっていうことがすごく魅力的で、やっぱりそれ自分自身の可能性を自分で信じられるってすごくやっぱ輝いてるしキラキラしてるし、僕にはすごく魅力的だなっていうふうに思って撮影させてもらいました。モールス信号のアイディアはこの映画って日韓共同制作で韓国のプロデューサーに入ってもらってるんですけれども、その韓国のプロデューサーのゲイリー・ビョンソッカムさんっていう方がモールス信号のアイデアは出してくれたんですよね。でそれはどこからかっていうと、映画の中に登場する、コロナ禍、村本さんがライブでコメディができなくなった時に ずっと嫌がっていたオンラインで、ライブを開催する。でその後の村本さんのインタビューで、オンラインでも人とつながれることができるというふうなことに気づいたっていうふうに言うんですけども、その延長線でやっぱり媒体じゃなくて自分自身だと、自分自身が人とつながれるって信じることができれば、それは宇宙からモールス信号でも誰かとつながれることができるんじゃないかっていうことを言っていて、で僕たち制作スタッフがその言葉がすごくやっぱりこう胸に響いたっていうことがあって、それを映画の中で映像と音で可視化したい、見えるようにしたいなっていうこと、あと象徴的にしたいなっていうことで、モールス信号をと星空を映画の一つの象徴として使っていて、でそれはやっぱりメディアの在り方っていうこともあって、メディアっていうのは一方的に何かこう情報を伝えるだけではなくて、やっぱり誰かと誰かがつながれる可能性を、作るものであるっていうことはすごく、僕たちは信じていて、それって村本さんが日本で、コメディで日本各地を回ったりして誰か人と人とのつながりができていくっていうことともうまさにそのものっていうか、そういうことメディアの在り方、人と人とがつながれる可能性というものを、可視化したくて、モールス信号っていうものを映画の中で象徴的に使っているっていうことですね。違うの、村本さんの言葉を借りれば、コメディってすごくこう社会が暴力的になっている、社会にすごくこう緊張が走っている時にそれをこう和らげる力がある、それがコメディだと、ガス抜きできるものがコメディだっていうふうに言っていることがあって、まさにその通りだなと思っていて、コメディって権力に対する抵抗っていうことに対してもすごくこう力を発揮するけれど、やっぱり僕は村本さんのコメディっていうのは、抵抗の面もあるけれど、誰かこう傷ついた人のこう傷を和らげたりとか、社会で無視されている存在の人たちをこう目に見えるように社会の中にこう出してくるとか、どっちかっていうとその根底にはなんか彼の優しさだったりとか、なんかね、多様性を信じたいっていう気持ちだったりとか、そういうものが僕は流れていると思っていて、だからさっきのモールス信号の話もそういった僕が見た彼のコメディあり方みたいなことを、象徴させたい、表現したいっていうことでああいうふうに使っているっていう面もありますね。ありがとうございました。ありがとうございました。
So I would like to present our amazing panel. So from closest to me, there's no introductions necessary. The Daisuke Muramoto, the comedian, who now moved to New York. So flew from New York today. And the next is Kirin Wachter-Green, is an assistant professor in the liberal arts department at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Her work focuses on Black feminism, queer and sexuality studies, African American literature, speculative fiction, and censorship and spectatorship. And the next is Michael Fish, is an associate professor in anthropology at the University of Chicago, specializing in social cultural anthropology in Japan. His current project uses ethnographic fieldwork in disaster-affected areas to examine local efforts to rethink disaster infrastructure after the 2011 Great Eastern Japan earthquake and tsunami. And the moderator is Yuki Miyamoto, professor of religious studies at DePaul University and the director at the DePaul Humanities Center. She specializes in nuclear discourse and environmental ethics.
Thank you so much, Aiko, for putting this together and for the generous introduction. And I'm truly honored to be on stage with you, such accomplished people, panelists here. And without further ado, since we don't have much time, I would like to pose an overarching question for this event, which is, what is comedy? And yeah, I know it's broad and it can be addressed from many approaches in a variety of approaches. So I was wondering, maybe Mike, you can talk about, you can speak to how comedy is defined or maybe perceived in Japan, especially in kind of adding on to Aiko's introduction. And so just to contextualize this film a little bit further. And Kieran, I was wondering, for you, maybe you may offer insight into the U.S. context, and particularly the with regard to cancel culture. And as Aiko has already told, you know, this is a kind of a dire situation given the current political climate. So that would be great. And of course, Daisuke, Director Hyuga was really moved, deeply moved and impressed by how you use comedy to connect with people. And I was wondering, I would love to hear from you, what does comedy mean to you?
So shall we start these questions? Please.
Sure. Can everybody hear me? It's okay? Yeah, big question. So, you know, I think it's important to say that comedy, first of all, is very, very hard. And hats off to anybody who can do it well, because it's obviously very difficult. As they say, you know, to make people cry is quite easy, but to make people laugh, that's very, very hard, right? And I think comedy is important because, you know, if things aren't funny, then they're just what they are. And so I think what this film is showing us is that comedy has many different levels. And we can leave aside the question of, you know, the levels of mediation, stand-up comedy, the film, that kind of thing. But comedy, there's comedy that's just entertainment. And a lot of the comedy in Japan tends to be sort of slapstick. It's safe. It's what sells. It's what people can watch on television. It's just entertainment. And I think the line is, and I think that the line that Muramoto-san works with so well, is the question when things can be funny but also serious at the same time. And I think that's a very hard line to walk, because you have to, comedy can cause a certain amount of reflection. It can speak a certain kind of truth. And that truth is not always something that's easy to deal with. It's not something that one often wants to hear. And it demands that, you know, as I said, one has a moment of self-reflection and one sort of looks in the mirror and can feel a kind of ill-ease, right? Can feel unsettling with this truth. And there's that very fine line between, with that, something that's unsettling becomes disruptive and something that's not funny. And when something that's unsettling, can also be funny. And I think that's the moment that Muramoto-san really works at, that moment that is sort of that unease there, where you're trying to move away from comedy that's just straightforward, something you can sell on TV and it's very slapstick and safe, versus something that's going to actually cause some reflection in the audience. And so I think that that's a very important aspect of this comedy.
Can you all hear me okay? What is comedy, Yuki? Comedy is fraught. I think about when Trump was elected the first time. I was a professor at NYU, and the late, great cultural theorist, Chicago's own Lauren Berlant, she was at NYU visiting, and it was literally the day or two after Trump was elected for the first time. And most of us were just in shock. We were grieving. We were spiraling. You know, people were looking to Lauren as this, again, cultural theorist with a lot of influence about how to proceed, what to do, how to think about this moment. And Lauren said, we have to remember comedy. We have to remember absurdity. We have to remember dark humor. And I have never forgotten that. I was really struck by that because as things have played out, it's become increasingly hard. Comedy has become increasingly fraught in our political climate. And as Aiko mentioned, I teach classes on censorship, and sometimes the focus of those classes is cancel culture. And one of the questions that I have students think about is what is the line, or what are the lines between critique, moralizing, canceling, and censorship, right? And we're increasingly in a fraught moment of comedy, right? That is freedom of speech in America. And here I'm thinking of the Joe Rogans, right? Where these comedians are claiming they're just satirizing or making social commentary, often satirizing wokeness, right? That's the topic. And it becomes a question of what is just edgy social commentary and what is offensiveness. I mean, or even hate speech. I mean, we were talking earlier, and I believe our translator here said, you know, decency has flown out the window. But then it becomes a question in an American context of, you know, comedy has always pushed at what's so-called decent. You know, the director mentions Lenny Bruce, who was arrested countless times in the 1960s for pushing at what was considered decent, right? So it's complex. I'll just stop there for now.
Can I just add? I wonder when the point is that comedy shifts to tragedy, right? And I wonder if we're kind of at that moment right now. At least it feels that in some ways that with the United States, you know, comedy is moving to tragedy.
And yet, the last thing I'll say, even in moments of fraught political crisis or overwhelming tragedy, or just overwhelm, a variety of responses is necessary. And comedy is one of those responses. I mean, clearly, as we just saw in the documentary.
Comedy についてですか? So in America, so I always felt so many comedians so very different thinking, so late show, Saturday Night Live, Trevor Noah, Corbett, so but Texas, Joe Rogan, comedy Mothership, Kill Tony, little, yeah, but in Japan, all comedian Joe Rogan. One issue, so very, so 彼らは全然日本のコメディアンは上に対してパンチアップが全然なくて、やっぱパンチアップをするとみんななんか政治に触ることへのアレルギーがやっぱりまだ日本の歴史の中であって、だからこのパンチダウンはみんなする、女性の養子の話とか、なんかちょっと LGBT のことをちょっと悪く言ったり、例えばプロテストする人のことをキラキラ笑ったりすることは結構 みんなやる。安全、弱い人をいじめるのは結構安全で結構やる。だからアメリカのカルチャーで一番好きなの。So I love American culture. So correspondence dinner, White House correspondence dinner. Yeah, that's so それこそがfree speech culture, right? Yeah, 日本は、そう日本は in Japan, you know, hands off politics, you know, yeah.
Just to supplement a little bit, he was saying that comedians in Japan can't really stand up to the status quo, and there is a general allergic reaction to anybody who questions or tries to subvert the authority. And these comedians take this easy way out by going after gender issues around, but like putting down women or questioning the issues of LGBTQ. And there is a sort of they go after the weak of the social weaks, really easy targets, because it's much harder to go after the big guys, right? So he, for example, he uses the White House Correspondents' Dinner, said that really exemplifies the kind of the essence of comedy that he enjoys.
そして福島とかなんか津波で流されたで亡くなった人たちがその家族がなんかこうジョークをみんな持ってる人がいて、なんかジョークってなんかこうなんていうの、生きるために必要なもんなんだということをなんかこう彼らから教えてもらったみたいな。そうだからすごいなんか、ジョー・ローガンのこととかも言うけど、なんかある種なんかちょっとなんかこう自分の痛みみたいなことをなんかすごく悲鳴みたいな感じに聞こえるっていうか、だからあんまりコメディアンを僕はなんかああだこうだっていうことはあんまり言いたくないけども、でも社会で生きてる限り絶対社会で生きてる限り社会というものは絶対コメディに出るはずだから、絶対に。だから本当になんか日本人っていうのは俺は好きだけども、やっぱりこの社会で生きてるっていう実感と自分を切り離して生きてる感じがする。不安じゃなくて済むから。
So he was saying, because he's been to Fukushima, where the earthquake of 2011, then the tsunami happened, and then he's seen the humors and jokes within the victims of the tsunami families of the tsunami victims, and he believes that the humor or the joke is integral to life, and as long as one lives in a society, joke must emerge out of life, right? And whenever he hears comedian talks and makes jokes, and he also hears pain in their jokes, and then he sees that as sort of like appeal from their personal experiences. So he enjoys and he appreciates these things. But he fears that within Japan that there is a discrepancy or there is hesitation amongst the Japanese people to face this unease and the coexistence of humor and pain, because it's much easier to ignore that it's there.
Do you want to go? Okay. I was just gonna follow.
I was just going to follow up and say humor is, to that point, humor is so historically and contextually bound, and it changes all the time. And I recently published an article based on my experience teaching a class here at SAIC. The class was on Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, which is an incredible novel that critics and readers often overlook in terms of the humor. I mean, it's such a canonical novel, but critics and readers often don't want to read the humor in it, and that's because the humor can be really uncomfortable and really difficult to parse and read tonally. But Ellison himself says the novel is one long rant, howl, and laugh. And so I write about how difficult it can be to teach students to read for humor in moments of political crisis. I mean, I was teaching that novel in the height of the movement for Black Lives, and it felt for some students that it was inappropriate to laugh, you know, at the subversive humor that Ellison was writing, because so much of it is reliant on offensive ideas and stereotypes. And so to get the joke is to recognize that in part that is what we're laughing at, as well as the pain and the trauma and the tragedy. And then it exposes or lays bare those of us laughing. And I wonder, why are you laughing? And why am I laughing? And why is Ellison laughing? And it's not always for the same reason. And that can be a really hard conversation to have.
Right. And just a following up questions, you are mentioning like all of us are feeling that political crisis. And I just cannot help thinking if whether comedy can function as a form of resistance, or would it be even unfair to expect a comedy to undertake that task? And we've been talking about tragedy and pains and how can we make a balance? Because one of the things that Daisuke has been concerned about is sometimes you have to take the risk of offending certain people. And so what's the boundary? I don't think there is a clear boundary, but is there a guidance? What's the balance between, or differentiate, like creative humor, creative freedom of creative comedy or jokes, and this kind of risk of offending others?
Yeah, it's a really a hard question because I think comedy it needs to be disruptive in order to be, think about it in forms of a resistance. But I mean, thinking about resistance is hard because, freedom does not exist where power is absent. Power, where there's power, doesn't mean that there's freedom. The two we have to think of the two in a more complicated way. So, we can think of comedy as sort of disrupting a certain fictional framework of the everyday and creating other possibilities for other organizations of society. So I think it's the disruptive aspect of it that necessarily works together with power and freedom. And especially, we see that where censorship is hardest in many societies, is where the comedy is the best, right? Which is, we actually see the comedy thrives in many ways under censorship in some strange way. So yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. But when we think about resistance, we have to think about from what political vantage point, because if we're committed to the idea that comedy can be a form of resistance, and we're committed to the principle, right, of free speech or using comedy as a subversive strategy to speak back to some perceived status quo, we have to accept that that principle is going to be embraced from every side of the political spectrum. And so again, if comedy is being used in a way that aligns with my political standpoint and viewpoint to speak truth to power, I might celebrate it. Whereas if I look at comedy being used as a form of resistance to, again, speak back to the perceived status quo, such as from the Joe Rogan side of things, right? That's not going to necessarily align with my idealized vision of what resistance is.
Ah, 俺にとってコメディのラインの話、バランス。いや、そうすごい日本でアクティビストの人たちと仲良くなっていろいろ教えてもらう。で、そうなった時にすごく自分がアクティビストみたいな感じに感情がなっていって、すごく正しいものっていう彼らの正しいものになっていって、すごくコメディが自分の中で面白いから正しいに変わっていったりとかすることが自分の中でちょっとこのこと言うのやめようとか、でもふとコメディクラブのコメディアン見たらみんな自由に喋ってて、すごく自分がすごく退屈な真面目な話に正しさだけになっていく瞬間があって、ちょっとアメリカ来てちょっと自分のバランスちょっともう一回コメディアンとして一回確認したいっていうことがあってアメリカに来たんですけど、すごく そうたくさんの強い正しさと触れてしまうと、すごくコメディがなんかすごく自分の中でなんかただのシュプレヒコールみたいにどんどんなっていくことの怖さがあるので、そうコメディとなんかこう社会を変えようっていう意識ってすごくバランスが今でも難しい。なんかあるニューヨークで拍手が来るけども、それは別に面白いわけじゃなくて、よく言ったっていうで別に面白いわけじゃない、それはコメディアンじゃない。すごく難しい。
So he says in Japan, so he's met and talked to many activists, and as he's learned of the issues and importance of their activism, he's learned to also somewhat adopt their correctness of correct views on issues, and then he says, what's funny isn't always what's correct. So coming to the U.S., he's found himself struggling to strike that balance between what's funny and what's correct. And in the U.S., sometimes he's been in the U.S. and being exposed to sort of overwhelming volume of political correctness, he doesn't want to just regurgitate what he's been told, what is correct, what is politically correct, and what is right to say, and then sometimes he finds himself, well, I'm just repeating what they said and what's correct, but that's really not funny, and then sometimes he says something, and then there's applause in the audience. He says, well, that wasn't funny, I was just being correct, and that applause to him is like, well done, you said it right, somebody had to say it. But then he thinks to himself, well, that wasn't really funny, but I am a comedian, so I'm supposed to strike that balance between what's funny while being mindful of what is correct.
Yeah. So 例えばコメディアンが料理人だとしたときに、こうもしビーガンとかのことを深くしてしまったときに、こう冷蔵庫開けたときにこうバター使うときに躊躇するみたいな。あ、これ。
So, for example, if I compare myself, a comedian to a chef, and then he says, well, if I am to prepare a vegan cuisine and I open the fridge and I see butter, and then I find myself hesitating to use. So it's that kind of hesitation where he finds himself, I want to be funny, I want to be a comedian, and then, like, how do I be correct?
Yeah, many justice.
Okay, so we really don't have much time, but I would like to take a question from the floor.
First of all, I applaud you in showing your vulnerability during the pandemic. I know that was a hard thing when everything shut down. I know people lost their minds. They walked out of their minds and never returned. And I also teach, so I applaud you for being a comedian, because during the pandemic I was like, oh, this is my chance to be a comedian and study and go to school, but nothing was open. Is there such a thing in this realm of comedy in Japan or in Asian comedy? I'm not trying to lump everyone, where there's such a thing as a roast? Because that's a form of flattery in America, to roast comedians. How do you show your gratitude to comedians amongst comedians? And is there such a thing as a roast?
そう、全然なくて、失礼なことを言うなとか、目上の人に、例えば今日みたいに足組んでるだけでも年上の人に足を組むなとか、例えば政治家のことを言ったら、政治家も一生懸命頑張ってるんだからですぐローストっていうのはちょっと日本の批判というものに慣れてない人はあんまり日本の文化にはなかなか根付きにくい、ルード、なんか失礼みたいな、難しい。
So there is very little roasting in Japan, especially you've been told to be respectful of the seniors and to the and then like here tonight he's crossing his legs like this on the stage, and if you were to do it in Japan, people would say you're being very disrespectful to the audience, you're being rude. So again, there's no roasting of politicians, and so I think the roasting is very little appreciated amongst the audience who is not used to having criticism. So while you were talking, I felt being roasted.
Yeah, hi.
そのつもりでした。
I will say, hello again. I met him 2 days ago. I did want to ask because with the realm of comedy and the realm of Japan and how it translates over to America and how Japanese soft power tends to neuter itself when advertising itself to especially American audiences, where we had, like, I am a game design major, so I think of things like Metal Gear Solid by Hideo Kojima, or even Hayao Miyazaki and Princess Mononoke, and we don't often really talk about the political themes in those things. So it does really feel like a struggle, not only by internally within the country, but externally through soft power to get political theming across. So, just wondering if for all the panelists, if you had anything to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, so there is a lot of commentary on politics of those things. Depends where you're looking. I think that within the universities, at least, there is commentary. I don't think that commentary, that political commentary, of the reading into like Miyazaki or reading into the games is popular. But I think within universities, you'll find people who definitely look into that and definitely understand the critical the politics behind it. But there is, I think, that sort of, what you call soft power, Japan representing itself across the world. I think there is, I think Japan does censor itself in many ways. And it has a very keen sense of how it's being consumed overseas. And so I think but that too is also, has been critiqued by people. Scholars. Yeah.
So while he was listening to the comments by the other panelists, he was saying so the audiences in the comedy club comedy audience in Japan and the U.S. are very different. So in Japan, the audience for the comedy are all families, so it includes children. So it's not adult targeting audience. So the comedians themselves are careful not to say too provocative things to offend or to upset children, right? So the differences in audience is a key in understanding. And also in Japan, so in the US, there are unions and there are supporters. If you find yourself in a hot bath, then people come and rescue you in support, and they express their support publicly. But in Japan, people, he only hears sort of criticism and comments that are very harsh, and those who support him will contact him discreetly and say, "I will support you from afar." So, and then he feels that there are a lot of big companies that have power over sponsorships, and they can crush you easily. But here, he feels that individuals have a little bit more of agency and power to exercise.
But then I think about someone like Dave Chappelle, right, who's canceled for his transphobic comments in his stand-up, right? And I was thinking about what was just being said about self-censorship. I'm interested in moments when comedians feel the need to self-censor based on the changing tone, right, socially. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. So yeah, I don't think people always, I mean, I think these moments that are so controversial today, again, like the Chappelle example, I mean, these go viral on social media, and I don't think everyone's coming to the rescue of celebrities. I mean, I think they're being canceled, you know, and whether or not we agree with the righteousness of that canceling, that's a discussion to have. But it becomes interesting to think about what crosses the line that leads to such cancellation, and when do people choose to self-censor and why.
Yuki, I think we can do just one more quick question if there's anybody on this side of the house that has a question. No? Okay, great. There you go. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So I just want to ask him about like what's your next goal, and also like I'm from Japan, and then as a Japanese, I truly understand that Japanese loves the gray zone we call. Like we don't want to choose white or black. We want to like just not to see it. Like, do you think you can change that culture, or you can just impact them something like that? 日本人なので質問するんですけど、次のゴールを教えてもらいたいなと思うのと、私も日本からアメリカに8年ぐらい前にやってきたので、日本のいいところとアメリカのいいところ分かってきたんですけど、やっぱそれと同時に良くないところも分かってきた。なんかそんな中で、まあ、これから村本さんが日本人にどういうインパクトを与えられるのかっていう、どういう考えなのかっていうのを知りたいなと思っています。
ですね、なんかどうなんですかね。なんかよくアメリカ人が日本人のことを言うときに自分でものを考えないみたいな、日本人は自分で考えないってよく言われる。でなんかトランプのデモとかプロテスト見てたら、考えてる人の結果がこれなんだって思う時思う時あって、すごくなんか考えない方が、政府に任した方がいいのか、こっちが主体になった方がいいのか。で民主主義っていうのはアメリカだし、でちょうど100年前に漫才はアメリカから、吉本がアメリカに行って漫才の文化を持ってったんですって。だから漫才はもともと100年前ぐらいにアメリカから持ってこられたと。そういった時にスタンドアップコメディっていうやっぱ批判的な精神のエンターテインメント、これを日本に、運びながら、なんかこうちょっと批判的な精神で笑いを取るっていう、なんかこうそういうものをなんかこう自分のコメディを通じて、やっぱ自分がかっこよくなればなんかみんな真似すると思うんですよね。だからこの国でちょっとなんかかっこよくなりたいなと思って、かっこいいコメディするやんみたいな。それは多分人増えてくるから、正しいよりもかっこよくて正しいっていう、なんかそういったコメディをやりたいなと、思います。はい。
In the US, Japanese are often discussed as people who don't know or who don't think for themselves. And he looks at these demonstrations or the rallies for the Trump, and then he thinks, oh, so this is what happens when people with political agency exercise their agency. So then he thinks it's very ironic. This is the result. The Trump election is what we get when people who have political agency do demonstrate and exercise. So 100 years ago, Yoshimoto, where his company, where he belongs, came to the U.S. and brought back Manzai to Japan. So there is a spirit of entertainment and also resistance, and he wants to have the critical sort of element within his humor. And if he succeeds, he thinks if I succeed and if I am really cool, if I'm considered cool, people will look at me and say, oh, that's really cool. And then being critical and having a sense of humor and then doing comedy as a form of resistance is also cool. So that's what he wants to do next. So I'm willing to bring back comedy, stand-up comedy to Japan, but I hope they don't tariff me.
Thank you so much, and also thank you so much for coming tonight. And please, oh, do you want to say something? Oh, no, you should. Sorry.
So, Aiko, thank you. So, support Aiko, thank you, Aiko. Everything, Aiko, thank you. Thank you, Aiko. Everything, Aiko. So tomorrow, live 明日 tomorrow, my show, なんていうとこでしたっけ？アルル時間は？
He's playing tomorrow at a Lula Brewery in Pilsen, so make sure you check out his show. I'll probably be there. Yeah, I'll be there.
待ってます。I wait.
Thank you so much for coming, and please join me in thanking our wonderful guests and panelists. And also the interpreter, June. Thank you. Wonderful job. And I know, of course. Thank you. Have a good night.